I never imagined myself as the type of woman to pause before entering her own bedroom, not due to misplaced keys or a forgotten item, but from a dread of what, or who, awaited on the other side. That evening, I was immobilized, my palm on the doorknob, my heart thudding so audibly I was convinced it reverberated through the corridor. The quiet surrounding me was oppressive, the sort that bears down on your eardrums, amplifying your inner musings beyond their normal volume. I was utterly unaware that my entire existence was on the brink of transformation, without any forewarning, no chance to brace myself. Just a fleeting look, a peek at something forbidden to my eyes, and it all began with an observation of Leo's actions. Leo, my stepson. Now, hold on. Before your imagination takes flight, I need you to grasp something vital. This isn't a narrative that's simple to recount. It's not cheerful, it's not charming, and it most certainly isn't straightforward. It's the kind of tale that ties your stomach in knots, the sort that jolts you awake at 3 a.m, compelling you to sit in the darkness and ponder, how did my life reach this point? Because I'm no antagonist. I didn't orchestrate this. I didn't request this. I was merely a woman who had endured such prolonged loneliness that I'd forgotten the sensation of being truly perceived. And Leo, he perceived me. But I'm jumping ahead. Permit me to transport you back, not to that precise instant just yet, but to the events that guided me there, to that threshold, that indecision, that fateful choice. Have you ever resided in a house that appears flawless externally? Manicured hedges, a polished car in the driveway, vibrant hanging baskets by the entrance. But internally, it's merely an assembly of individuals feigning contentment? That was my dwelling. A husband engrossed in his career, who conversed with me as if I were a colleague, who hadn't genuinely touched me, truly connected with me in nearly 2 years. I once kept a tally of how often he glanced my way each week. Eventually, I ceased counting. And then Leo arrived, 19, well-mannered, considerate, yet reserved. He came to live with us following some difficulties with his mother. I refrained from prying. It wasn't my concern. But at times, his eyes held a look as though he bore a significant burden too. It's peculiar how individuals carrying their own hidden pain can recognize it in one another, isn't it? Still, I maintained my distance. I had to. I was his stepmother. I prepared meals, managed the household, inquired about his university courses, and stayed within my designated role, until that particular night, that singular moment when I witnessed something I was not intended to observe, when I stumbled upon Leo in a situation so intensely private, so unguarded, I could scarcely draw a breath. And what compounded the situation, what truly deepened the wound, was that it involved me. I wish I could assert that I looked away and erased it from my memory. I wish I could state that I confronted him. I wish I could claim many things. But the reality, the unvarnished truth, is far more convoluted than that. And if you've ever experienced solitude, I mean genuine solitude within a home bustling with people, if you've ever glanced past a looking glass and failed to recognize the woman reflected there, if you've ever yearned for a single instant of connection so desperately that it filled you with fear, then perhaps, just perhaps, you'll comprehend how events transpired as they did. Before I continue, if you've ever shouldered a secret that rendered your chest heavy each and every day, if you've ever longed to shout the truth but were paralyzed by how others might perceive you afterwards, press that thumbs up icon. And if you're new to this space, welcome to Tales of Hidden Betrayal, where we unveil authentic stories that challenge everything you believed you understood about affection, fidelity, and the complexities of the human spirit. Subscribe and become part of our candidly emotional circle. We offer understanding here. Now, allow me to return you to that evening, to the hallway, to the silence, to the door I was hesitant to open, yet did so nonetheless. I used to envision that being a stepmother would evoke warmth, something tender, something fostering, aiding someone's development, providing counsel, being a comforting presence, Instead, it merely felt like another item on a never-ending checklist. Fetch the groceries, do the washing, check on Leo, offer a smile at the dinner table even when conversation was scant. I'm 38, married for 7 years, and I once believed I was fortunate. My husband Mark is accomplished. He's a provider, always ensuring we had a pleasant home, 2 vehicles, health coverage, a pension plan. But he ceased truly seeing me a long while ago. I don't even believe it was a deliberate slight. I think he simply forgot how to touch me, as if I held significance, how to speak to me without glancing at his mobile device between phrases, how to sit beside me without it feeling as though we were merely 2 office mates sharing a canteen. He travels frequently, business engagements, seminars, meetings that extend into overnight stays. Occasionally, he'll send a message to check in. Sometimes he won't. But the element that stung the most was the profound quiet that had enveloped the house, not a quiet born of tranquility, but of emotional chasm. That silence grew more oppressive when Leo came to live with us. Leo, he's 19, Mark's son from his previous marriage. He wasn't meant to reside with us. He had his own existence, his own tempo, and a strained rapport with his mother. But an incident occurred between them, something no one seemed keen to discuss. The next thing I knew, he was carrying in containers and establishing himself in the spare room down the corridor. I was uncertain how to feel about it initially. He's not my biological son, but I still felt a degree of responsibility. I began preparing more substantial dinners, leaving reminders on the refrigerator, inquiring about his studies, even when all I received in return was a nonchalant shrug or a mumbled, "It's all right." He was subdued, courteous, respectful, but there was an inherent sadness about him, as if he shouldered more weight than typical for his age. And periodically, I'd notice him observing me, not in a manner that felt inappropriate at that juncture, just different, as if he perceived more than the facade I presented. And perhaps that's what unnerved me most, because Mark hadn't truly seen me in ages. Not the person beneath the cosmetics and the rehearsed smiles, not the woman who still wept in the shower occasionally, just to release an unexplainable burden. Leo, he didn't vocalize much, but his silence felt distinct from Mark's. It didn't exclude me, it seemed to invite me in. The house itself offered no solace. Spacious, immaculate, and unwelcoming. Not a single item was disarranged, not a picture frame askew. One might assume such a place would feel secure, comfortable, but it felt more akin to a gallery, as though we were all merely actors, maintaining a polished veneer, hesitant to engage with anything too authentic. We'd gather at the dining table, 3 seats occupied, yet the room still resonated with emptiness. Mark would browse his emails between mouthfuls, Leo would keep his gaze fixed on his meal, and I would smile. I'd engage in superficial conversation. I'd inquire about everyone's day. And then I'd clear the tableware in silence as usual. At times, I'd linger at the kitchen sink long after the dishes were done, just clutching the sponge, gazing out the casement window, not contemplating anything specific, just allowing the quiet to envelop me. I don't know precisely when the shift began, when Leo's presence ceased feeling like an imposition and started to feel like a reflection. Perhaps it was the way he'd express gratitude after dinner, even when no one else bothered, or how he'd observe if I altered something minor, like donning a different pendant or styling my hair with a side part. Or maybe it was simply that he saw me, not in the way a man appraises a woman, not then, but the way one individual looks at another and truly discerns the fissures within them. It wasn't affection, it wasn't yearning, it was acknowledgement. And that sort of thing, that kind of focus, it creeps up on you. It makes you contemplate what you've been lacking and what lengths you might go to experience that sensation once more. One evening, I arrived home sooner than anticipated. It was unplanned. My appointment had been called off, and Mark was away on business yet again. I recall pulling into the drive and noticing all the lights were extinguished, save for a gentle amber luminescence emanating from Leo's window on the upper floor. The house appeared tranquil, as if it were collectively holding its breath. I eased the front door open, as silently as I could, as though I wished not to disrupt the atmosphere within. Perhaps I simply didn't want to signal my return. I'm not sure. The floorboards groaned beneath my shoes, the kind of creak you only notice when you're not supposed to be present. The drawing room was undisturbed, no unwashed dishes in the sink, no sound from the television, just that faint hum of silence, the kind that feels as if it's observing you. I proceeded upstairs, assuming perhaps Leo was engrossed in his studies or had fallen asleep with his lamp on. But as I neared the landing, I perceived something. Not melodies, not conversation, something else. Soft, measured, breathy. My heart faltered. I told myself I shouldn't intrude on his privacy. I told myself to simply continue walking. But an impulse made me pause. His door was ajar, just enough to allow a sliver of that warm illumination to escape into the hallway, enough for me to overhear what I shouldn't have, and enough for me to witness. I wasn't attempting to pry. I wasn't searching for anything. But my gaze registered it before my mind could fully process. He was on his bed, his back slightly arched, a hand moving beneath the duvet. The glow from his laptop screen illuminated his face with that familiar, cool light. And for an instant, I couldn't draw breath. It wasn't his action. It was what he was viewing. It was me. It took a moment to comprehend because it was old, a recording I'd almost forgotten existed. Me and Mark, from years prior, one of those intimate moments we'd captured during a rare evening of closeness, back when such closeness existed. I didn't even recall where we'd stored it. I thought it was lost. But there it was, and Leo was watching it. Watching me. I made no sound, just stood there, petrified. A part of me urged me to storm in, to seize the laptop, to shout. Another part, the part I'm not proud of, remained motionless. I retreated slowly, my breath trapped in my throat, my hands trembling. The hallway suddenly felt constricting, the air too dense. I reached my room and closed the door behind me like a phantom returning to its confinement. And then I just stood there, staring blankly, mouth parched, heart galloping. I felt revolted, intruded upon, bewildered, but also something else, something I was reluctant to acknowledge. Because the most disturbing aspect wasn't that Leo was watching me. The most disturbing aspect was how it made me feel, not frightened, not disgusted, but seen, wanted, and I despised myself for that. I perched on the side of my bed, still quivering, attempting to understand it. Why that particular recording? How had he even discovered it? Did he realize I'd seen him? Did he intend for me to see? I tried to convince myself it was an accident, that he'd stumbled upon it, that it signified nothing. But deep down, I knew better. There was something in the way he'd been looking at me recently. Gentle, inquisitive, as if I were more than just his stepmother. I wrapped myself in a housecoat and lay atop the bedspread that night, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. Not just what I'd witnessed, but what I'd felt. Because something had irrevocably shifted, and no matter how vehemently I tried to tell myself it was merely an isolated incident, I knew it was the precursor to something more. The following morning, I behaved as if nothing untoward had occurred. I smiled, poured coffee, asked Leo if he desired some toast. He replied affirmatively, as he always did, courteous, composed, as if everything were ordinary. But nothing was ordinary, not any longer. I sat opposite him at the kitchen table, observing the steam ascend from my mug, my stomach churning with each passing second. He didn't avert his gaze, but he didn't actively seek mine either. Just sat there, eating quietly, like any other day. And perhaps that's what made it more unbearable. The uncertainty. Did he know I saw? Was he embarrassed? Did he want me to see? Or was it truly just a mishap, some dreadful, convoluted coincidence? I spent the entire day attempting to dismiss it. I cleaned items that didn't require cleaning, rearranged books on the shelves, reorganized the pantry, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. that image, that moment, him watching me. I told myself perhaps it was mere inquisitiveness, perhaps he'd found the recording by chance, perhaps he'd clicked on it without realizing. But the longer I dwelled on it, the more I knew it wasn't that. It wasn't accidental, it was intentional. And what frightened me even more than that dawning awareness was how I felt. Because beneath all the alarm, the confusion, the disgrace, there was this peculiar, awful excitement. I detested it. I detested myself for it. But it was present, this unsettling flutter in my chest, as if something dormant had been stirred. I began to perceive things I hadn't before, or perhaps things I'd simply chosen to overlook. The way Leo's gaze lingered when I bent to retrieve something from a low shelf, the way he'd loiter in the kitchen after supper, observing me tidy up, the way his eyes moved, not impolitely, not aggressively, but deliberately, as if he were seeing me in a manner no one else had in years. And once I acknowledged it, I couldn't ignore it. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that. Mark used to, when we were first wed, when our relationship was new, back when he'd approach me from behind while I was cooking, encircle me with his arms, kiss the nape of my neck. That version of him had vanished somewhere between our 3rd and 4th year of marriage. Now, if he touched me, it was perfunctory. A pat on the shoulder, a tap on the arm, a mechanical greeting. The kind of touch that conveys, I know I'm supposed to touch you, so here's something. But Leo's glances, they weren't empty, and once I realized that, I became acutely conscious of his presence. I could sense when he entered a room before I even turned. His footsteps were slower around me, softer. When he spoke, his voice deepened slightly, as if he were addressing me specifically, not just speaking in my vicinity. And I started to transform too. Initially, it was minor, innocuous, I assured myself. I let my dressing gown hang a little more loosely in the mornings, wore camisoles instead of oversized t-shirts while preparing breakfast. I wasn't doing it for him. That's what I kept repeating to myself. But I knew that wasn't the truth. I found myself dressing differently with more deliberation, more attention, selecting fabrics that draped in just the right places. When I knew he might pass my room, I'd linger by the doorway a moment longer, hair unfastened, skin still flushed from my shower. I loathed myself for it, but I didn't cease. And when our eyes met, those prolonged gazes across the kitchen or down the hall, I didn't look away. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I began to yearn for it, to yearn for that attention, that vitality, that warmth that had been absent from my life for so long I'd almost forgotten its sensation. It wasn't about Leo, not initially. It was about me, about feeling as if I were alive again, as if someone perceived me. And yet every night when I retired to bed, the guilt would surge in like an unstoppable current. This was wrong. So profoundly wrong. He was my husband's son, even if we'd never shared a close bond, even if we'd only cohabited for a few months, that was immaterial. But the boundary between propriety and prohibition, it wasn't merely indistinct anymore. It was shifting, transforming, becoming increasingly difficult to discern. And with each passing day, I felt myself inching closer to it, one glance at a time. It commenced with small gestures, innocent actions if viewed from a sufficient distance, but up close, they were far from innocent. The first instance occurred when I was returning from the market, bags in both hands, arms protesting. I was struggling with the keys when the door swung open before I'd even managed to knock. Leo. He didn't utter a word at first, just extended his hand and took the heavier parcels from my grasp, his fingers briefly brushing against mine. It was fleeting, but I felt it, like an electric charge, or perhaps an unasked question we were both too apprehensive to voice. He carried them into the kitchen and placed them down with care, as if he feared they might shatter. Then he looked at me, truly looked at me, and said, "You shouldn't have to manage all this by yourself." Just 7 words. That's all it was. But they lingered with me because Mark never uttered such sentiments anymore. Mark presumed I'd manage everything. shopping, cooking, cleaning, organizing, smiling. And somehow, Leo, 19 years of age, noticed more than the man I'd been wedded to for 7 years. After that, our interactions evolved. They deepened. Initially, it was just informal, brief exchanges in the kitchen about songs or university or literature. But then he began to pose genuine questions to me about myself, about my history, about who I was before I married his father. And when I replied, he listened, not with that preoccupied, half-nodding glance Mark offered from behind a laptop screen. Leo listened with his entire being, leaned forward, met my gaze, responded in ways that made me feel understood. And I started to anticipate it, to anticipate him. One evening, Mark was away again. I was in the lounge with a glass of red wine and an old film playing quietly. Leo entered, paused, then settled on the opposite end of the sofa. We remained silent for a while, just watching. Then the scene transitioned. The couple on screen shared a slow, yearning kiss. I felt my body grow taut. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I could sense the alteration in the atmosphere. A few minutes later, I reached for the television remote. He reached at the same instant. Our hands met. We both paused, just long enough for the contact to carry significance. Then he withdrew his hand. "My apologies," he whispered. I shook my head, but I didn't say it was all right. I couldn't, because it wasn't, and yet it was. Following that, the touches grew more frequent, more intentional. A brush of the hand when he passed me the pepper shaker, his arm grazing mine as we stood too near in the corridor, a hand on the small of my back as he moved aside to let me pass through a doorway. Minor things, easily rationalized. But I ceased rationalizing, because a part of me didn't want them to end. I found myself actively seeking his company, lingering in the kitchen longer, hoping he'd appear, taking strolls in the garden at twilight, knowing he might follow, leaving my bedroom door slightly ajar. And then the messages began. The first was tucked inside a magazine I'd left on the sofa, just 6 words in a hurried script. "You're so much more than they perceive." I gazed at it for a considerable time. The second arrived a few days later, slipped beneath the jam jar on the kitchen island. "You deserve to be felt, not just seen." And then another. "If I could alter the past, I'd begin with you." Each message made my chest constrict, not with remorse, but with a longing for something I couldn't possess, something I shouldn't desire. I kept them all, concealed in a drawer beneath old shawls and forgotten anniversary cards, but I'd retrieve them late at night, when the world was hushed, and read them as if they were love notes from a previous existence I'd never experienced. One afternoon, while tidying the lounge, I accidentally knocked over Leo's drawing pad. I hadn't intended to open it. I was merely retrieving it, about to slide it back onto the bookshelf. But it fell open to a page, and there I was, sketched in graphite, soft, detailed, sitting on the edge of my bed, combing my hair. I recalled that moment. It was just the previous week. I hadn't known he was observing. I stared at the drawing, my hand unsteady. He had captured something so personal, so vulnerable. It felt like viewing a version of myself I no longer knew existed. Not the weary spouse, not the unnoticed woman, but someone yearned for. Was I deluding myself, or was he extending an invitation? I told myself to keep my distance, that this was perilous, that this was improper, that I was courting disaster in a tinderbox house. But I didn't stop. I didn't shut the door. I didn't discard the messages. I didn't erase the sketch. I continued, one small moment at a time, and deep down, I knew where it was inevitably heading. The night it occurred, the heavens were incensed. Thunder grumbled low in the distance, the kind that resonates deep within your chest. The rain fell relentlessly, lashing against the panes, as if attempting to force entry. Mark was away again, a seminar this time, somewhere warm, I believe. I hadn't inquired. The house felt altered, not merely quiet. but charged, heavy, as if it were holding its breath. Around 9 o'clock, the electricity failed. Just like that. Utter blackness. No hum from the freezer, no glow from the corridor night lamp, just stillness and the sound of rain battering the roof. I lit a couple of tapers and positioned them around the lounge. The wavering light made the shadows writhe. The tempest outside felt remote compared to the turmoil brewing within me. Leo descended the stairs, shirtless, wearing only loose jogging bottoms, his hair damp from a shower. He paused upon seeing me, taper in hand, then offered a faint smile. "Are you all right?" he inquired. I nodded. Just trying to prevent the house from becoming a cavern. He settled across from me on the rug, both of us facing the low table, the candlelight flickering between us. We spoke, nothing profound initially, just about how the storm reminded him of his childhood, how he used to shelter under bedclothes and imagine thunder was merely giants playing skittles in the clouds. I chuckled, not because it was amusing, but because it felt good to hear his voice, to hear something human. Then the silence descended, a prolonged one, not uncomfortable, just full. He looked at me, truly looked, and I couldn't bear it any longer. I asked softly, barely above a breath, "Why that recording?" He blinked, swallowed. I could discern the answer in his eyes before he voiced it. "Because it was the only time I saw you being cherished." Those words fractured something within me, something I'd been holding clamped shut for years. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stared at him as the candlelight wavered between us, making the room feel smaller, more private, more intimate. He reached out, slowly, as if he feared I'd recoil. He touched my hand. I didn't withdraw. His fingers moved gently across mine, and I swear the entire world dissolved. The storm, the guilt, the years of silence. It was just him and me and everything we hadn't articulated. My eyes stung. I felt the tears before they escaped. One trickled down my cheek. He reached up and brushed it away with his thumb. And then, just silence. No words, no breath. Just a moment. And then he kissed me. Tenderly at first, cautiously, as if awaiting consent, and I granted it. I kissed him back, and once that boundary was breached, it all came apart. I don't recall standing. I don't recall how we transitioned from the lounge floor to the settee. All I remember is warmth, skin, breath, the way he held me as if I were something delicate yet essential, the way I relinquished everything I thought constituted my strength, the way our bodies communicated in a dialect I hadn't heard in years. There was no fear in that moment, no hesitation, just surrender. To him, to myself, to the woman I once was, and the one I never had the chance to become. Afterward, we lay there, entwined in the quiet, the taper burning low. I gazed at the ceiling, my body still resonating, my heart shattered wide open, and I knew the instant it concluded that everything had altered. There was no reversing it, no erasing it, no feigning it hadn't transpired, no justification adequate to make it right. We had crossed a line that didn't just blur, it disintegrated, and I was no longer certain who I was. The morning after, I couldn't meet his gaze. I awoke before dawn, enveloped myself in my robe, and descended the stairs as if attempting to outpace what had already transpired. The taper had extinguished on the table, the sofa cushions were still indented, the throw we'd used was discarded on the floor. All of it felt excessively conspicuous, as if the room were vociferating at me. I prepared coffee with unsteady hands, didn't even consume it, just needed an activity. When I heard his footsteps on the staircase, I tensed, and when he materialized in the doorway, eyes gentle, lips slightly parted as if he were about to speak, I averted my gaze. I couldn't cope with the hope in his expression, because hope implied he believed something could arise from this, and I couldn't permit him to believe that. He stood there for a moment, waiting, but I kept my back to him, feigning to wipe the counter that didn't require wiping. "Hey," he said softly. "Can we—" "I have a great deal to accomplish today," I interjected, my voice sounding unnatural, strained, abrupt. He paused. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. "All right," he said after a moment, his tone subdued, wounded, and then he departed. I collapsed onto a stool, heart thumping, stomach twisting. What had I perpetrated? Every fiber of my being ached, not merely physically, but in this profound, agonizing manner, as if something within me had shattered, and now I was desperately trying to force it shut with trembling hands. For the remainder of the day, I evaded him. If I heard him upstairs, I remained downstairs. If I went to the kitchen, I waited until I couldn't detect any movement. I told myself I was shielding him, but the truth was, I was hiding. From him, from myself, from what we'd done. Later that evening, Mark returned. His luggage hit the floor with a thud, and his voice resonated through the house, excessively normal, excessively jovial. It made my skin crawl. He kissed my cheek. I recoiled. He noticed. I could see it in the way his smile wavered. But he didn't comment. Instead, he inquired what I'd prepared for supper. I had to compel myself through it, serving meals, pretending everything was unchanged. But it wasn't. Nothing was. Leo came down last, moving slower than usual. He didn't meet my eyes, sat across the table, scarcely touched his meal. I kept my gaze fixed on my plate the entire time. Mark attempted to discuss his trip, asked Leo about university, made jests that fell flat. None of us laughed. After supper, Leo vanished upstairs. Mark looked at me with a searching gaze. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I replied too quickly. "Just weary." He didn't probe. He never did. But I could feel it. He sensed something was amiss. Not enough to make an accusation. Just enough to make him question. That night, when Mark reached for me in bed, I flinched again, claimed I had a migraine. He rolled over without a word, fell asleep, and I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the tempest raging within me. The subsequent days were worse. Leo barely communicated with me. His eyes, once filled with warmth, were now heavy with bewilderment and something else. Betrayal. I had offered him something only to snatch it away. I had allowed him to believe there was an opening, and then I'd slammed it shut. He wasn't irate. He wasn't frigid. He was simply wounded. And it was torturous for me. I tried to expunge it, but every room whispered of what we'd done. The sofa, the hallway, the staircase, even the mirror in the bathroom where I caught my reflection and failed to recognize the woman staring back. I went through the motions of existence like a mere shadow of myself. The guilt bore down on me incessantly, but so did the ache of something that had felt genuine, even if it was profoundly wrong. I couldn't confide in anyone about it, not my companions, not my husband, not even myself, really. So I wore the guilt like a fragrance, close to the skin, imperceptible to most, but ever present. And Leo? He grew quieter, withdrew, as if attempting to shield himself from the whiplash of my decisions. Or perhaps he just finally perceived me for what I truly was. A woman adrift in her own desolation, desperate for something warm, even if it meant getting burned. I haven't disclosed this to anyone, not even my counselor. It has resided within me for such a long time, pressing against my ribs like a secret striving to break free. But tonight, I needed to allow it to breathe. Not for absolution, not for atonement, just to be acknowledged. Because sometimes the burden of what we bear in isolation becomes more crushing than the transgression itself. And I'm weary of carrying this in silence. Was I at fault for what transpired? Or was I merely human, desperate to be seen, to be touched, to feel something after years of feeling utterly numb? I still don't possess the answer, but I know this. It's easy to dictate what one would do until you're the one standing in that corridor, your hand on a doorknob, your heart splintering inside your chest over something you didn't even realize you were capable of. Let me know in the discussion below. Have you ever crossed a boundary you couldn't uncross? Have you ever looked at your reflection and wondered, who even am I anymore? What course of action would you have taken in my circumstances? And if this narrative resonated with something within you, if it made you pause, made you feel, made you recall a version of yourself that you interred long ago, then don't keep it confined. Like this account, share it with someone who might be shouldering their own unseen burden. And please subscribe to Tales of Hidden Betrayal, where we bring the secrets people dare not voice into the open. Because the truth is, we all harbor stories we're afraid to tell. But perhaps, just perhaps, the telling is where the mending commences. And if you retain nothing else from what I've shared tonight, remember this. Loneliness is a perilous hunger. If you disregard it for too long, if you pretend it doesn't exist, it will begin to consume whatever is nearest, even if it's something forbidden, even if it's something that was never meant to be touched, even if it leads to your undoing. So don't wait to be seen. Speak, feel, reach out, before the silence devours you.